G'day. It's time to down your unders. Review and dissection of content from some of the sharpest minds in the game. Hosted by Adam Camilleri. Art of War. Down Under.
G'day everybody and welcome to episode 212 of the Art of War Down Under podcast. Sorry for this one being a little bit late. I wanted to get an illustrious panel of LGT finalists, people who went deep, people who performed very well from a myriad of different factions and representing a bunch of different play styles. And because of that, I had to wait for the dang event to end and of course people to rest up a little bit before I could get people on for recording. But due to waiting that long, I managed to get three absolute monsters on this show. First and foremost, hailing from New Zealand, but no longer residing there, David Gaylard of the 40k Fireside. Hello, mate.
Hey, bro. How you doing? Nice to be back on again.
Always my pleasure to have you on, dude. The green hope of the entire world, Brian Seipp, is also joining us. Hello, mate. Second place, Brian Seipp, actually.
Yeah, I managed to squeak my way through some combat mirrors, so after that.
Yeah, definitely that tower game, combat mirror, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Tiger Shark's well renowned at many attacks in combat.
Yeah,
to be fair, Luke
and
was
last
trying to hit him physically after the Tiger Shark didn't come in, so that's a combat mirror, right?
Yeah, technically, we might as well. And then lastly, the man whose arms just continue to sprout, Inez Wilson. You already heard his voice. Hello again, my man. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show and to, be able to hold the microphone with my third arm.
We are doing an LGT recap, the LGT being, was it 830 players ended up rolling dice on the day? Absolute monster mammoth event, second biggest event in the world, slowly catching and closing with the LVO. And it is warranting a show of its own to recap the biggest and brightest, what did well, what did not. We're going to be asking these gents what their experience was like, getting them to extrapolate things like the terrain, how it changes form and function and list design, and play patterns, in addition to their high points of the event, what they thought of the meta, what under and overperformed in said meta, and then wrapping it all up and going over to part two. We're going to enter some Patreon questions. If you want to get some of that goodness, come and join us over at Art of War Down Under over on Patreon. These gentlemen have a slew of things that I'm going to let them plug. Inez is going to do the honors, kicking us off first for stat check.
Yeah, I'm Innes. I am 1/12 of StatCheck at this point. We continue to spread our glorious cult. If you're interested in hearing more from me or any of the other shows on the network, you can check out youtube.com/StatCheck. We do meta coverage, we do tournament reports, we do a bunch of content around getting better in team formats or singles or anything of the like, as well as a healthy dose of, I'm not going to swear on Adam's podcast, but crap talk and banter and all the good stuff that goes along with that.
Did you stop yourself from saying shit?
Yeah,
right.
I didn't ask at the beginning. I wasn't going to.
Seamus will bleep it if you do. If you can let a couple slip, but we save most of them for part two, where we let things fly off the handle a bit more thoroughly. I'm assuming Brian would also be plugging his Where's a Stat Check. Would you have anything in addition you'd like to plug, Brian?
I actually have nothing to show because everyone I usually show for is in the call with me, so I'll just let them do the talk.
Beautiful, David, the 40k Fireside. Cannot wait for the LGT recap episode.
Yeah. Obviously, myself and Vic VJ do the 40k Fireside. It's a lot less regular than Innes and the Stat Check team, maybe because we have a sixth of the amount of people. But no, Brian and I are also part of Team Ignite, and Innes is like a 35% member as well.
Nice.
He wears the apparel just as much as us, actually. So.
It's my favorite jacket, I will admit.
I love it.
Do you guys have blazers, with flaming blazers for Team Ignite? You should if you don't. That would be
blazers are a pretty good idea. Yeah, that's pretty good. Or maybe some golf vests or something.
Yes, like that, golf vest, bomber jackets. You guys should have. Yeah, you should have a uniform. That would be.
Iron bomber jackets would be pretty dope, actually. I'm gonna write that in the group chat now.
Trademarked Adam Camilleri, can't have it. No, it's all right. But we this one's going to be a little more freeform. I'm more than willing to sit back and let these three incredible gentlemen talk about all the incredible things that happened at LGT, because they were there and I was not. So if they do kick off and start talking, I'm just going to let them roll, gents. But to get things started, Brian, we'll start with you, mate. Good event. Naturally, you came second. It can't have been that bad an event, but what did you think of the LGT this year?
It was a fantastic event. One of the things that's really nice about the UKTC events and kind of everything Zach puts on is every single time you go to another one of the events, it's always been improved in some way. Maybe it's not a major improvement, but he's always looking at onboard feedback and try and improve it. And I think we saw some of that this year with We'll get into it more later, but I think the terrain was more interesting. I think the food options at the event were quite good. The organization was fantastic. Everything happened on a plan. I mean, when you go through a tournament, there's nothing that happens which derails the tournament. That's one of this size in particular. That's quite rare, and that's happened for this one. It was awesome.
Fantastic. Ines or David, anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, for me, I thought, so we had a piece of terrain added recently, which changed the way in which you can interact on the boards by quite a bit, made a lot more units a bit more viable. So that was good. The event is it just runs super smoothly, right? Like it's kind of crazy when you think about the amount of logistics that need to go on to make something like that happen. Not to mention, I think there's also about 500 people playing other games or something as well. So there's not just 40k. Like there's like 15 or something other game systems as well. So it's pretty extraordinary that they put all that on. So no, it's always an awesome event. So yeah. Really
What was the terrain piece they added?
So they added one of these like long strips that's obscuring, but you can drive over it freely. So it really opens up you being able to put like vehicles in the middle of the board or mounted units, for example, that can then move a bit more better, pseudo like the Games Workshop style terrain.
Yeah, almost like the WTC vents we had in 9th edition.
Yes, exactly.
Obscuring if you were behind them, but you could just roll on, trundle on through them if you wanted to. Inez, anything you want to mention?
I will shout out the Invitational for not being 5 rounds this year because it was brutal last year. It was just a 3-round effectively knockout event this year, which I much more enjoyed. It definitely enough to be like, I was willing to do it this year. If it had been 5 again, I'd have been like, I'm not sure I could commit. But yeah, just playing 3 games. It was like doing the RTT on the Friday. That was great. Other than that, I want to shout out just like the consistency of like we knew when round pairings were going to go live. It was always half an hour before the round. We got round pairings an hour and a half after the round ended on the Saturday night, and it was always a consistent time with the event. And when you're like looking at getting your preparation done or getting down to bed and stuff like that, having all that stuff just ready to go like exactly when it says it is, I can't shout out the judges and the ref team at all for more for like making sure that stuff was all on point.
Yeah, that stuff is really big. Like just having a plottability of the experience, because I mean. TOs is literally the most underloved member of our community, pretty much, for the amount of work and effort that they put in. So them being able to do that level of execution and polish is really exceptional. But that's a great segue by David straight into talking about terrain. So there's a lot of comparisons right now. Essentially, we have 3 terrain systems in the world being played prevalently, that being Games Workshop terrain, that being WTC terrain, and we have the UKTC terrain. What would you guys describe as the differences between those 3 essentially systems?
I think Ennis, you've probably played the most on GW as well, right? So do you want to go, bro?
Yeah, I would say for UKTC specifically, it's got the most. I would say it has like some of the densest deployment zones in some maps and some of the lightest in others. I think that's kind of one of the things I would describe UKTC for is inconsistency across like terrain formats. So your list has to be able to adapt to a wide variety of circumstances. When you go to a GW boards, outside of like a couple of specific ones on specific maps or WTC boards where you can get the same kinds of ones tend to be played in singles play, they all tend to be fairly similar in their approach. Whereas the UKTC boards, something like the Search and Destroy map versus the Sweeping Engagement map is just a vast difference in the amount of like physical stuff you can hide in your deployment zones. With the new, there's like a lot of the maps have these conjoined ruins now, like the Super L's on the GW or Super L's on the GW or WTC boards. And it's like this giant W shape effectively that you could probably hide 1,500 points of an army in if you wanted to. And sometimes that's in your deployment zone really relevantly. And sometimes it's just like in an awkward position where it doesn't really hide very much or only hides things from one specific angle that doesn't do amazing for staging. And I think that can create quite a lot of like your list has to be really flexible, really adaptable, willing to play from reserve, willing to play on the board, or just very durable in order to make the most of that. And I think we kind of saw that bear out in the results. A lot of lists, it was very good for melee armies. We saw 2 melee armies at the top cut. But there was also like some good shooting armies made the top. We saw like the Tiger Shark list that went all the way, and there was lots of different ways to approach it. And that was definitely, it's a bit different from some of the other ones where you look at like a WC maps and you're like, these are good for fast infantry. And you look at GW boards and you're like, these are good for X, Y, or Z, depending on exactly what subset you're using. Whereas the UKTC maps, you could kind of make an argument that anything had reasonable ways to approach any different given board type.
Brian,
I would certainly say there's a lot of variance though, I think as well. Like I think one critique I would have of the mission terrain combo for LGT was that I think it didn't reflect like a lot of player feedback from the previous tournaments. That it didn't feel like it was building on like the previous super majors to improve the terrain mission pack combination, because realistically speaking, outside of 2 deployments, which is Crucible of Battle, and Search and Destroy, the maturity of the terrain packs for like Sweeping Engagement, Tipping Point were pretty poor, I think, to be honest. So it really felt like you had like Sweeping Engagement, Search and Destroy, and Crucible of Battle were the only two, I would think, actually well-designed terrain maps. And those two boards actually play drastically different. So you kind of got to be ready to jump into any scenario for UKTC, I think, at the moment. Because depending on what combination you land on, it could mean that your list is going to have to play a rapidly different game, I think.
I actually quite like the Sweeping Engagement map, but I think it might have been well suited for kind of what my army was trying to do, so that's probably why. But I mean, and then like same with the the Hammer and Anvil map was also kind of bananas for what my army was trying to do. So I think there was just a point which I definitely agree with Dave with is there were definitely these massive swings in terms of the map being quite good for shooting or quite good for combat, and only a couple maps were okay for both. But for example, the Crucible map was one where it was very hard to hold your expansion objective if your opponent had guns and you didn't, while the Search and Destroy map was really hard for armies that didn't have combat to really fend it off. So it made it particularly interesting to try and design lists for that.
Yeah.
Do you see this level of variance as being a good thing or a bad thing? Because I from what you guys have been saying, I think this is I'm excited to play on UKTC boards all of a sudden because I've been missing variance. I've been missing variance a lot because I play pretty much exclusively on WTC boards, and they get a bit samey. They get a bit samey.
I think it's both. It's such a cop-out answer, but I think it's both good and bad, right? So it's good. It's good in the sense of it has a lot of variety, and it really forces you to try and write lists that can solve problems. Like one of the lists I was looking at playing was Blood Angels, but I really could not figure out how to solve the Crucible expansion objective in a mission against guns, right? Because it's so easy to hit that. And so in that sense, it really creates an interesting dynamic for constructing a list and trying to figure out what's going to work. But on the other hand, it also adds a lot of luck into how things go. If you happen to get a matchup which is really bad on say that Crucible, or you get the melee army on the Search and Destroy, when on a more neutral map it might be okay. It tends to swing the matchup quite heavily. So that part of it is kind of a bit of a feels bad. But I do think overall it was probably added a lot of interest.
Yeah, I think we'll probably talk about it later because Innes and I played on this one particular board that was, well, we'll talk about it later, but that particular board layout was at the level of variance, which I think was drastically unacceptable to play on because it almost didn't matter what you did. But if you land on a mission map terrain format where it doesn't even matter, you might as well not even show up to the board, then obviously that's like not a great scenario. But the last two rounds that Innes played were
variance, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And one mission though was also the mission played by the least number of people in the event, besides exactly the finals, right? So I think just it probably is something which wasn't given as much thought, or clearly wasn't given as much thought as the other rounds, which is unfortunate and definitely needs to be revisited. And you're definitely right, that terrain on round 7. So we're talking.
I think there's an argument for an event like this that if you're going to have round 1 to 5 be consistently practice and prep for everybody, just repeat 1 to 5 for the top cut. I think that would have been the thing that I would have done that makes sense. But if you're going to have that level of variability, at least have it be variability that everyone can plan for. Like I frankly hadn't looked at the round 6 and 7 boards, and I pulled up to a Cursed Cultists on round 6 on the table where they could probably have staged their entire army. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be an interesting game. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. Like everybody played that, and we're all sitting there like you could look at the round 6 maps and the round 7 maps, but you're kind of putting the cart before the horse if you're building your list for them a little bit too much. Because some amount of top people are not going to make that, and if you spend a bunch of time hyperfixating on that, you'll flounder before the finish line, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's also an argument that like the least amount of people play rounds, like round 7 in particular. So just make it a nice, consistent map because there's only 4 people repeating playing that combination, and at 11 o'clock at night, whenever you're playing, I'm sure it's not going to affect people.
Yeah,
playing off just a good, well-designed map.
And just for context for people, the round 7 is the shadow round, so that's why it's so few people playing.
Yeah.
Like the only thing you want from Shadow Round is definitive results because you don't want freaking draws in the Shadow Round. So you don't want purge, you don't want draw hammer missions. You just want a winner and a loser, and probably as quick as possible for the sake of the players.
Yeah, like case in point, Innes was saying he played against 60 ACDC. Did you play against 60 ACDC Innes on
That was round
Hammer and Anvil?
6.
Yeah,
Round
on round
7
6.
was
Yeah.
a hypercrypt round. Yeah.
So round 6 is Hammer. They're both round 6 and 7 are basically both Hammer and Anvil. One's tipping point, one's Hammer and Anvil. Round 6 is the densest of dense boards you've ever played on, and round 7 is the openest of open player placed terrain. It's the factory thing that doesn't block any line of sight. You've ever played on. So
I don't think round 6 was a problem at all. I could put a battle wagon on 2 objectives behind a Super L in the middle of the board. I don't see what the problem is.
But I played Alex Harrison on Blood Angels, and he's put his entire army behind all the terrain outside my deployment zone. I was like, great.
Yeah,
Didn't you win that game?
Was having a great time.
Yeah, I won that game.
What are you complaining, Desmond?
Going second is really powerful.
Brilliant. All right, transitioning on to some meta talk. So this meta has a lot to be said about it. From the results, I've got the results up in BCP right now, and just scrolling down it, man, there is some spicy stuff in that top cut. But talking about the meta as a whole, we'll kick off with you, David. How did you feel about the LGT meta, the dispersal of factions, and then one that ended up doing well?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a really good sign for the state of the game at the moment. I think it's the best we've probably played, and it feels like it's up to the player most of the time to determine who's going to win the game, which is fantastic, of course. There are still a few bad units in there, but most notably, what I would say is that actually 0 Deathwing Knights and 0 Sisters in the top cut or top 15 or whatever like that is pretty crazy, right?
One guy on Gladius finished like 16th exactly.
So Alex Harrison 13th was the first Astartes, and then there was the Dark Angels in 14th, and then 16th was also Space Marines.
Yeah, so if you told me that going into it, I probably would have thought that's probably not accurate. But what I would say is, like, at a tournament this big, I could see a different universe of maybe who scored more points and didn't have to play the Shadow, and actually the reordering of 1 to 8 it could be drastically different. For example, Nassim and I, placed around. I placed 8th. Nassim placed 5th. I think both of our lists were extremely well positioned to play the top 8. But the path on who you play, for example, like we both got knocked out by Tal, for example, right? So yeah, there's a different universe. I could see different armies coming out on top, which just goes to show how close it is, I think, in general, which is obviously awesome.
And just for reference of the audience, the first placing Sisters was in 19th and then also in 20th. So yeah, they didn't make the top 15. No Sisters in the top 15. And just another thing, so I do another show. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Warhammer Meta Chasers. And I did the entire stats breakdown for the London Grand Tournament. The faction podium was Necrons with 56 players in representation, Chaos Space Marines with 50 in second, Astra Militarum with 46, and then we had Tyranids, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Sisters with 45, and then generic Adeptus Astartes, so unaligned Astartes with 42, which pretty much just denotes that there was a huge amount of people playing with their starter sets.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest signs of the health of this meta was at least for me, was in the lead up when I was talking to a lot of other really good players you'd expect to do really well at this event, and I was asking what they want to play. Everybody just kind of went with the army that they had the most comfort on, that they kind of were most familiar with. There was no army which was like, I have to be playing this because if I'm not, I'm gonna be at a severe disadvantage. Because there's always every army has a matchup which they can lose to, and every army has matchups that they should win into. And so it really just became about skill expression, which was really cool.
Well, that's exactly right. We get to a meta where reps matter again, which is great, where it's not just playing the S tier, broadcasts, whatever. Sorry, Innes?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the things that I was looking at personally going into it, having been playing a bunch of Deathwing Knights, is that we all knew what the best armies in the game were going into this in theory, right? Thousand Sun Sisters and Dark Angels, I think, were, speaking for myself, but I don't know about the rest, I would assume similar for the other guys, maybe plus minus like Hypercrypt, were things that we were expecting to be doing well, and therefore were things that we were all accounting for, but also expecting everyone else to be accounting for. And that always, whenever you have something that's that standout in the metagame, it's very easy to look at it and go, well, do I want to be another person caught holding the bag against everyone else that's prepping for this army? Or do I want to just play something that is a little bit more unfamiliar or a bit more comfortable on, if I know that going into the event that there's only really going to be like maybe 4 good players on Bulgaren, Like, am I really planning for it to the same degree as being like, well, I know there's going to be really good. I know there's going to be good Dark Angel players in the room. I need to make sure I have a plan for Dark Angel, so I'm going to prep that matchup. But if I prep for Bogren, I'm not going to be prepping against somebody who's as good as David or as good as Nassim, and I'm going to get like almost negative practice into that game, right? So,
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that viewpoint. In addition, is there something to be said for sisters underperforming due to the fact that they're a very stable target? Their codex came out, Bringers of Flame has been the only thing played at the top level, except for Spain taking penitent host. Essentially,
Germany.
Germany, but yeah.
Apologies, Spain. It was Germany. Is that something to be said? Like, you three illustrious gentlemen, have you meted for sisters, and are you a reason why they underperformed?
I was going to say, I think if you look at the list that Innes and Brian played, like, there's definitely a large edge that you gain from people being unfamiliar with the army that you're playing and playing against. And so, like, Orcs and GSC, like, when's the last time you played against that, right? Probably never. And if you haven't played against Innes and or Brian. So if you can sit a bit behind the bleachers and play an army that is probably underrepresented, but realistically is still quite strong, then you can gain quite an edge there as well when you pilot it very masterfully as well. So I think Innes and Brian are the perfect example of that, really.
It's almost like I read their lists and tried to get them on the show because of that. And you're just here because I like you a lot, David. So. And I like Guard. I like Guard a lot. But Innes, Brian, please speak to that. Did you guys metaphor, Dark Angels and or Sisters? And if you did, how so?
So I can, for me, I didn't against Dark Angels. I kind of recognized that, especially coming from a Team USA background, I had a lot of reps into John on the army. I knew what was necessary to beat it with a combat army. And I had reasonable confidence that people would not be achieving that because they're not John Lennon. And so because of that, I felt like I had a game into the army. It's still going to be an uphill battle, but given that I had a game, I kind of moved on. When it came to Sisters, they're one of the main reasons why I actually added one of the tech pieces I have in my list, which are big mechs, into there, which allow me to kind of run through screens because Sisters love to use things like Seraphim to fly up, shoot you, and then kind of wrap your transports so you can't get out and do things during your big impactful turns. And so something like big mechs allow you to get around that.
Yeah, I call them expensive gargoyles a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I think that in that sense, for sure, I tried to build around that, but at least, and I'm sure it's going to be different potentially, at least for Innes. But for me, it was less about what can I build into my list to beat these armies, and more about, is there anything I can add to my list that'll stop those armies from stopping me doing what I want to do?
That's a great shifting of perspective, because so many people just look for the silver bullet rather than looking for the enabler.
Yeah, because
that the way of describing it?
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, and that's really what I was looking for, right? Because my game plan, I want to be able to execute what I want to do, and I want to dictate the tempo and pattern of how the game's playing out. And oftentimes with Orcs, at least when you start to stumble, it's because your opponent is in a position, maybe they went first, and then they have these abilities to have really good things for move blocking, and then they're the ones dictating the tempo of the game, and they're the ones telling you how you got to play. If you go second, one of the things that Josh likes to say when he talks about the Orc WOG right now is that if you go second, the opponent gets to decide when you WOG, right?
Yeah.
And adding things like mechs allow you to have that agency, a little bit at least of that agency back.
Fair. Innes.
Yeah, I kind of the same boat as Brian. Like, I knew my list going in had game into both of those lists, and I wasn't particularly it's never going to be free. Those are both very strong armies. Specifically for Sisters, there was a ton of people playing double or triple Exorcist at this tournament. I don't know if anybody else caught that going through the list, but there were so many Exorcists at this event, having seen them basically nowhere before this. And it was definitely like, okay, I'm going to need to make sure that I have an appropriate counter tools to deal with that, in my deployment and planning, which a lot of the time just meant playing really aggressively into Sisters because they were going to indirect you anyway. But that was already what I wanted to do. So I think the Sisters metagame kind of moved in a way that made me much happier into them. I don't know how that felt for everybody else, but the more traditional Sisters list, my list is more than happy to just out-OC it and get shot by it a bunch, but stand on objectives around it. I can deal with the minions because I have like the mortal wounds after I move, which I can trigger before they get back in transports and things like that to like whittle down their Dominion squads and things like that, restrict their screening and stuff like that. So I was fairly happy with just like that as an option. And then Dark Angels, I was fairly confident that basically any game that I played against Dark Angels, I was going to be the best Dark Angels and best GSC player at that table, which usually puts you at a pretty good standpoint when you're playing a match like that, which is a lot about movement and shenanigans, unless John Lennon randomly booked a flight over. So I was fairly comfortable with that matchup as well.
David, anything you did to account for the meta menaces?
Yes, I had a bit of a unique element in my list. I was playing the one unit of 3 Sentinels, and I was kind of acutely aware that I thought the Hypercrypt would be a good list to run in the tournament. A lot of people probably don't know, if you're for context, that the UK community is quite tight knit, and that I find it quite bizarre, but a lot of people have a lot of visibility on what others are practicing and what they will be likely to play. And so I kind of thought, well, if I can force people to, if Sisters and Necrons are going to be popular, then I'll put Scout Sentinels in, because if I go first, I can take advantage of going first. And oftentimes on the UKTC boards, going first is usually a disadvantage, I would say, based on the deployment zones. And so I had those pieces in there because turn 1 you can shoot Castigators, or turn 1 you can just launch 6 las cannons at a Monolith or a Tesseract Vault or something like that, like key unit. So yeah, one little decision point, but I also wanted, there's also guard reasons for playing that too. But I wouldn't, Bullgren are kind of just an all-rounder as well, right?
I love the triple Sentinels, either Scout or Armored. I think I like Scout a bit better in the meta at the moment, but both of them are sick. I had a question, dang it. This is the one I've been asking a lot, all right? I never want to go first in the current state of the game. Never, not once. Always want to go second. Do any of you guys want to go first at the moment?
my brother,
yeah.
And I'm asking this because I know Brian's here and Orcs want to Orc. So
yeah. So I said this a bit in my post Liam Crumping interview. But so for Orcs, they definitely want to have they want to go first because of the WOG. Obviously, there's downsides to that because you open up more potential for secret missions and late game scoring, which can be challenging. And so pressure armies in general don't mind, going second to kind of stop that. But with Orcs and the WOG, a lot of people, on the surface look at it and they will say, oh, well, if Orcs are going second against you and they have to declare the wild battle round, you can just back up and it's fine, right? That's not real. People think that's real. It's not. If you position aggressively enough with your Orc army, and that's where something like the battle wagons come in to be able to allow you to do that in the position of relative safety, then if people back up, they're on their back line of their deployment zone, and you're still probably going to catch them. It's just not a viable strategy. The real reason why going second is rough for the WOG is that the turn after you hit them, when they're then trying to crack back and deal with all the chaos, you don't have an invuln save. And that's when you lose so much of your army that you otherwise would have been able to scam them out of a third of their damage for, or in my case, half their damage, because, WOG 5-ups. But I think that's the main reason why going first is so important. It gives you that agency to be able to really maintain a lot more of your army in their crackback turn than you otherwise would have had.
Inez, David, either you guys like going first or prefer going second?
You go, Inez.
I would say it very much varied by matchup. My list I kind of designed to be as agnostic to going first as possible. So it wants to, it's perfectly capable of going second. I get my deep strike reserves on turn, a turn later. All that good things that come from going second. You get the secret mission, you get like in primary, but it also has like 4 units with very solid scout pressure. And again, it has deep strike reserves and transports. It's more than happy to put some pressure on you early. So it was kind of as agnostically built to being like, the mission pack tells me I want to go second. My list is happy going first. I'm okay with anything. So generally for me, wanting to go first or second came down more to what my opponent was doing. So if I played against someone else that was doing that kind of very late game focused list, I obviously would have preferred to go second, but more on the side of denying my opponent it than to have it myself. There were definitely some games where I was like, you're sweet, I get to go second, I get to apply a ton of pressure, and pseudo end the game on turn 2 or 3 by just trapping my opponent in their deployment zone. I went first against Triple X Sisters, and I was like, oh, great, okay, I get a turn of staging before I lose all my transports. But then I played my game against Josh Roberts, where it was, we're both playing high OC transport armies. neither of us were ever going to score primary. It mostly just came down to who went second, and I got to go second that game, and I got my secret mission. He didn't get his, and in that game I was always going to prefer going second. So it was very much a component of my list was built to be able to do either. I was happy to go second if I needed to, happy to go first if I needed to, unless my opponent was like strongly preferenced towards one side or the other, in which case I was always going to prefer to be on the side that I wanted. And that was ultimately like one of the reasons I lost my finals game was we were playing a mission that heavily instanced towards going second in Linchpin, and then I was playing against Hypergrip that also heavily wants to go second, and I went first. And it's just like the confluence of factors there. Like you could build any list in the game, but under the right circumstances into the wrong list, if you get the other side of your preference, that sometimes situations just don't work out in 40k.
Yeah, fair. David.
Yeah. I mean, I think Guard is actually one of those armies that going first because it has such a big board presence can be quite detrimental for your opponent, because you can stage onto all the objectives, and then you can obviously then shoot whatever they try to contest with, and then oftentimes even if they try to contest, you can still hold it. So it's quite good in that sense. But I did secret mission 3 out of 4 games on day 2. Oof. So yeah, quite good.
Which one, if I can ask? Which ones?
3 out of 4 of them, yeah. The only one I didn't secret mission was Tau, where I went first and had good advantage going into anyway. So, but the Guard can really do almost all secret missions as well, which is quite interesting. You can Unbroken Wall, where you hold 3, or the Battle Line one, are both very, very doable. So it puts your opponent in a tough position, especially when you start moving your Leontas into the middle of the board on turn 4. So you threaten the older capturing the outpost to the Warlord.
Yeah,
so
there I start bugging out of their head. They're like, "You what?"
yeah. So I mean, I'm not. I don't know. It's a bit of an interesting part of the game right now, where secret mission is so important. I think it's important at least, but it's an interesting mechanic. But
just opening it up for discussion. Do you think it's been a good addition to the game? Do you think it's well balanced, or do you think it's too well weighted one way or another?
I think they could revamp the secret missions to make them either slightly harder or slightly less rewarding. I do like the 20 cap mechanic, but on some missions, for example, like Linchpin, if you get blocked in your deployment zone or whatever, you can score like 35 points if you secret plus hold at the end of the game, which is, given that you can only score about 90 points in a game, quite a significant impact. So it does feel a bit weird if you can just mount up 45 points at the end of the game when your opponent doesn't actually get to move their models because you went second. Yeah,
it really does feel like playing against fifth edition Eldar again, where it's just like when we only had end game scoring, and you would play the game for 5 turns, and the only thing that mattered was the Eldar went second. And it can be a little frustrating on that sense, where it feels like we've spent the entire time playing this, developing game where we play 5 turns and every turn matters. And suddenly, because of secret missions, it suddenly feels like only turn 5 matters. You spend the whole game trading material for points, and then on turn 5, because they're ahead on material, they just win with no counterplay. And it's like, trading material for points is one of the core tenets of playing 40k, and suddenly it feels like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So the only one I have an issue with is the hold 3 in the middle. I want that one to be changed to be a little bit harder. I think there are some armies that are very good at getting their warlord on your opponent's objective, but anytime you can hold your opponent's home objective, I think you're playing a high level of the game and you're doing well, and you should be rewarded for it. That should be a thing. But holding
your warlord anymore.
Piss off Magnus.
Yeah,
and also uppy downy 3-inch deep strike on your warlord in tower is also a thing.
I think you should have to control it personally. Like just being on it is a bit strange.
Yeah. I was about to say, the only change I want to see there is you having actually out seeing. Brian, what are your thoughts on secret objectives, secret missions?
Hate them, mate. I think that they are a poor thing in the game. I think that, and I'm pulling something that I'm sure Anthony says all the time. But if you spend most of the game losing the game, it's okay to lose the game. I just generally feel that it disproportionately hurts certain strategies. For example, the whole pressure strategy, where you're as is put it quite eloquently, you're trading a lot of material to deny a lot of their primary points in the early game, with the expectation that by doing so, you're able to kind of win on points when the dust settles, and then in the end, they're able to make up, almost all of those points in the last turn. That can be pretty gutting from that perspective. So obviously I'm biased being an orc player, and that being one of the the main strategies that orcs do. But I also think, coming from the perspective of WTC and teams, that it plays a disproportionately large role in the outcome of some of those rounds. by
Yeah.
allowing for that, you know?
I really thought, and I'm very happy to say that secret missions weren't a absolute mess maker of WTC. I was really worried they were going to make a mess of the event with just like people in yellow matchups just being like, I went second, I'm literally not leaving my deployment zone.
Oh, that definitely still happened.
It did, but it didn't cause the event to be a joke, is what I was.
There were definitely round wins that were direct results of that, though. I mean, like, our round against England, Anthony's secret mission for like 35 primary in turn 5 in his game, and that there's no way we win that round if that doesn't happen, right? So
and that's the thing, right? Because that game, you know, let's say I'm in a 12-8 versus Inez. He has a 12, I have an 8. I went second. I ain't risking anything. I am not doing a single goddamn thing except screening and denying 15s on primary where I can. And then bada bing, bada boom, he should be 15-5. Cool, 20 points, 11-9. Yeah, and it just completely swings so many turns of good work and good play. And
I actually think that it has a larger impact in a singles environment because the outcome is binary versus in teams that the outcome is a lot more linear in scale. You know, I can think of a game that probably one of the favorite games I've played is between Innes and I, actually, Warhammer Fest 2022. Innes?
2023. It was like in the middle of last year, right?
Yeah. And so on stream, and it's my guard versus Innes's Iron Hands, and like if Secret Mission was around then. This is the end of 9th edition. Like,
we would have been playing a game, right? I would have just been winning, right?
Yeah, I would have just been out of the game from the get go. So it just goes to show, like, obviously that's not a like for like comparison, but like that's a good example of where Innes and I both had to play 5 turns of Warhammer, and each 5 turns were as impactful as the previous one. But now it feels like the 5th turn is such a massive impact.
Yeah. And I guess the reason I highlight its impact on teams is that unlike singles, you have games where people are playing with no intention of trying to win the game. And that's, I suppose that's a complete change in perspective. They're trying to just maximize their loss. And so when you play from that viewpoint, it's a massive tool. All right, let's go. Let's break down this top 10. So in 10th place, we have Manichima with Chaos Demons, which, wow, awesome to see Demons made a top 10. Innes with his Gene Stealer Cults, David with his Astra Militarum, Andy Quaz Cohen, I hope I say that right, with Necrons, the only Necron that made the top 10, which is quite astounding, seeing as there was, 56 in attendance. What's that percentage of 800?
I think it was the most represented. I think it was about 4.8% or something. Yeah,
it was most represented. Then we had Johnny Simmons with Adeptus Mechanicus. I'm actually going to open that list. We might break that down. Nassim Fushane with his Astra Militarum. Lewis Smith with his Tiger Shark wielding Tau Empire. Alex Fowler with 2,000 Suns. No matter what people did, we still couldn't keep 1,000 Suns out of the top 10. We're able to keep you guys were able to keep Dark Angels and Sisters out. Brian with his Orcs and Liam VSL with the Chaos Space Marines. What surprises you about that top 10? And if you can tell us for the things that do surprise you, why did you think they did so well in this meta? We'll kick it off with just jump in whoever wants to.
I'm personally a little bit surprised that 1,000 Suns made it in there. Actually, I was kind of surprised. I was curious to see how they would do because I thought the meta and the boards were a bit hostile towards them. And actually, Alex Fowler was playing the variant with the 2 Mutaliths that I didn't actually think was going to be better. So
he also had a DP
against the grain. Yeah, DP as well. Crazy, right? So good. I did watch this game though. He had really sharp players, so unsurprising to see him do well there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just, it's probably the absence is what's most surprising. Like I said, we kind of talked about earlier, like the absence of some of these top. Like, I think there were no Marines, right, in that top 10.
0 Marines in the top 10.
Like, I mean, not even just no Dark Angels, no Marine between Blood Angels, that Vanguard, because the Marines are obviously incredibly popular and incredibly strong right now. So that's really surprising, I think, to me.
I mean, one of the factors we did have a lot of Marine players that made the top, that made 5-0 actually ended up dropping. Like there were 2 Space Wolf players that made 5-0 that both ended up not being able to play the top. So I think there was definitely like a factor that some of the lists that we would have expected to see represented just didn't get to stick around. So maybe there's a world where if 1 or 2 of those Space Wolf players play, one of them makes top 8, right? So there's always going to be a factor like that with an event like this where you have to keep playing into a third day. the people who the people who are able to stay are obviously the people who can make top 8. Same reason, obviously, like Manny on KS Demons didn't make top 8 is he couldn't stay for the Monday. He stopped at 10th because of that. So I think there's always a factor of that. But I think what the top 8 for this one shows is that faction mastery was very important. Alex Farmer's been playing Thousand Suns for at least a few months. David, you're a true-blooded guard player. Brian is the orc of all orcs, right? We've got the Andy Coscone, who's been playing Necrons for ages. We've got Johnny Simmons on Admec, who's been running them for at least 6 months.
Yeah, it's his only army. That's his only army.
His only army. Yeah, there you go. So it's like, this definitely showed that the people who were doing well, and I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the terrain and the adaptability. You needed to be able to adapt to any circumstances to make a deep run of this tournament.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that.
Yeah, Lewis has also been playing Tau for like ages. He's actually like basically my neighbor, and we commuted back and forth together. So yeah,
that's such a juxtaposition to a lot of the tales of the, a lot of our hallowed tales about the LVO, where it's a group of great players get together like in the month before and brew up the most broken list possible and don't play it in any other events, hide it, secret it away until the LVO and absolutely roll their way through the event.
And there was definitely some components of that, right? Like there was definitely a few people, right? Like Manny had just swapped to Demons, right? But Manny's a very naturally talented player. There are a lot of lists like that out there. I think the biggest innovation we saw for this one was like we're playing in a fairly set metagame. The biggest innovation was probably the Sisters thing, and it just didn't turn out to be as good as we had thought, or as Sisters players had thought potentially. It stopped at the round of 6, right? That was the last place the Sisters players went out, which is still very respectable for that list in an 800-person tournament. I just don't think there was a lot of room for a complete blow up of the metagame to happen 3 months into a metagame where we've all been, we all played WTC on this metagame. We explored this one pretty heavily, right? So
precisely, yeah, exactly. I'm actually surprised that a double monolith Silent King list didn't make it, if I'm being honest. But we obviously had the other Necron list there as well. But
yeah, just going a quick look at that one. I actually was just looking at the Dots and Mechanicus list, which does have quite a few similarities to the Polish WTC list, with the exception of them having a big block of breaches in there. But apart from that, the one unit of Ballistari, and then it's just like Bird Jail. Slap them in Bird Jail, which is gathering a lot of strength there. But also had the 10 Rust Stalkers, which I do think is a concession for singles. You can't just find yourself, versing orcs and you just don't have
I think it's 30 of them, like 30 birds, 30 stalkers in the invitational. Dude, it was brutal. It's so many dev wounds.
Dude, it's a good freaking list. I'm not sure many people have the intentional fortitude in bank account to play it, but it's a good freaking list, man. And the Necron list that went deep with Andy, the triple Hexmark, I actually really like that. Triple Hexmark Destroyer, I think, is sick. Only single Catan with Silent King, two double DDA, and the T-Vault. So no monolith, no big unit of heavy destroyers either, which is massive.
Yeah, and he's playing a Nightbringer as well, which is
Nightbringer.
Pretty unusual, actually, to be honest with you. How was the Nightbringer versus Uranus? That's pretty odd one, isn't it?
He touched an objective and died.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But that would have happened to any Katana. It wasn't unique to that guy. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was surprised that Katana actually made it in there, to be honest.
I mean, I think it was answering a specific problem for his list of it can sometimes he doesn't want his Doom Tailors getting tagged, right? Or his Vault, because the Vault is pretty vulnerable once it gets tagged up. So having a little bit of counterpunch against those melee armies just means he can threaten a heroic or something like that against it, because it can sit in between the tines of the outer layer of the Vault and then threaten a heroic on either direction. Which is pretty relevant in some matchups. It obviously didn't come up much in ours, so he just kind of pushed it at me and it died, but it did take me a turn to deal with it, right? So
awesome insight, by the way.
Answering that question.
Yeah, great insight.
Where like a Tesseract, like a Transcendent Catan doesn't do that, or the Void Dragon doesn't either, right? He needs a specific answer to a specific kind of question.
So I've unpacked Liam's list, and I've kind of figured out what it does. But I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Brian, how does this list work? Because on paper, I even messaged this list to Matt Morrisoli, and I was like, have a look at this. Obviously, it must be good, but I can't see it just yet. And now, after watching some of his games and unpacking it with some other KO Space Marine players, I freaking get it. But Brian, tell me about this list. How and why did it win, and why did it do so well? What is it about this list that is good?
Well, if you just take every keyword that exists in Warhammer and you slap it on epic heroes, and then you put those epic heroes on basic troop units, turns out that they do cool things. So the list is really meant to fight combat armies and also have a ton of damage that it can deal out as well. So it's got a lot of really cool tricks. Overall, the detachment rule gives them Oath, which is quite powerful when you combine that with the generic army rule of the Darkbacks, giving you sustained and lethal abilities. And then they have a lot of really really cool and synergistic stratagems. Combine that with having a lot of really powerful melee units. Chosen, who I'm sure we're all familiar with because they've been around forever. Joined by characters such as Huron Blackheart, which gives them a reactive move, coupled with the stratagem reactive move.
Yeah.
They have access to, and then you have Fabius Bile making a chosen unit go on steroids and be unkillable by boys, from my personal experience at least. And then they have these two Brocks that can advance and charge and are just quite powerful, good wounds, pretty defensive, have access to AOC in the detachment. And then combine that with adding Lucius, who has fight first, and then suddenly you've got this situation where you've got a bunch of characters that can, situationally stand back up, units that are really good at winning combats, the always powerful rhinos with legionaries and chaos lords and chosen and stuff inside, and then some solid, reliable shooting platforms with obliterators and predators. And you're just playing good Warhammer. And you play good Warhammer, you win good games. Turns out pretty good at Warhammer.
So the obliterators are the ones that stood out to me as fair enough. Everything else up until that point, I was like, yeah, I could see how this could be good. Then I saw 2x2 obliterators, and I'm like, and then after you guys were talking about terrain, is this the fact that, if you took two more, if you took two Vindies instead of the obliterators, there are some tables he would just not been able to hide them. They something would not shot in one.
The obliterators are particularly good on this attachment because of their indirect ability coupled with so
correct.
So you got to have this unit that indirects, which now is much worse than it was, but because of the fact that you're using Oath, it means they're reliable indirect targets, especially with sustained and lethals into targets, so you can deal with these frustrating things behind walls. And kind of just, again, it's all about just kind of putting pressure on the right points at the right time with a list like this.
There's also notably a decent amount of synergy with the obliterators and Huron Blackheart, which he wants to do anyway with the reactive move, being able to deploy them aggressively and then redeploy them to a position or throw them back into reserve where they can then deep strike. That combined with Oath of Moment and the stratagems being able to give out assault and ignore cover to those units just gives him a ton of flexibility. They're just a reasonable package for solving a problem that the Predators don't quite finish off, or softening something before you charge it, or dealing with like a fight first unit that he might otherwise not really want to deal with. Something like a Massive Execution behind a wall and World Eaters, the list would otherwise kind of struggle with.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's like CSM good stuff, really, in a lot of ways, isn't it? Like, there's nothing like where you're like, oh, that's not really a thing. It's like all of it's like very solid. If you would look at the army average spectrum, like how the quality of the data sheet that's being played here, it's all very high quality data sheets being amplified by a detachment that, frankly, it's quite surprising that people thought this detachment was a bit weird and underplayed, because it's obviously very good. Like, Oath of Moments is really good, and it has key stratagems that are insane, obviously, as well, with reactive move, and obviously ignore cover is really strong as well.
Moving Oath is also not nothing in the current environment where there's lots of big units that are worth killing.
Yeah. I mean, imagine you want to play Oath and you've got Thick City. Necron's Hypercrypt in your metagame, right? Where you're like, great, mate. Oath, your big thing. Did.
Imagine if Marines had sustained or lethals on demand plus Oath.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's being again, it's the theme we've been talking about this entire cast, which is this is a list which allows for an extreme amount of skill expression.
100%.
And that's what's really cool about it.
It's a lot of hero hammer as well. It's taking quality but also quite unique characters that do things you can't really buy for points and slapping him in a list. Like Cypher is just such like Cypher in like a shooting army does next to freaking nothing, but put him into this pile and he's god mode shutdown in the melee mirrors. It's absolute incredible.
I'd still play Cypher in a shooting army because it's the Vect against AOC and Deathwing Knights is absolutely bonkers strong.
Also, he's the only freaking lone up you got, so he still adds value, right?
As an orc player playing combat, I played against Vect effects like 7 out of 9 rounds. For the love of God, can we please nerf that? That is so strong. I hate it so much.
I would like it to go from 12 to 9 and then see. And then possibly,
I'm fine with 12. Just make it once per game. You have the aura or something, like you activate in a phase. You have that, because then it would still be very strong, but you'd also have to deal with it the entire game.
So start of any phase. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. All right, gents, we have some very unique lists on this cast right now. And I'm going to give you guys a chance to, kind of tell people about the cool, awesome lists you guys put together and how they kind of played. But first, we'll start with David, because unfortunately, it's the least interesting of the three.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can just go on mute for 10 minutes if you want.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to ask you a question. Did you want to take Daunts, or was it never an option for you in your list?
Yeah, it was definitely an option because it's like my best painted model as well. Me, I really hate having big, expensive things.
Yeah, you do.
So I love to look at things along an axis of like utility, toughness, output for the points. And so if you look at any list I play, it's always like the leanest of lean lists. So yeah, unfortunately, just not the right time and place for it. I think it was good. It's a good one, but if you look at some of these boards, like against Blood Angels on round 6, I played. Dawn would have been absolutely locked out of the game, useless. Or it just would have had the same output as a tank, for example. So, not for me. But yeah, my list is... the only unique part is that I don't play the platoon command squad, so I just 6-inch order everything, and it seems to work out fine for me so far. So,
nice.
Yeah, 18 Bulgaren, Lehman Russ battle tank, tank commander, Rapier laser destroyer, of course, 2 chimeras, 20 Catachan, some infantry, Hellhounds, and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, Guard, I feel like it's one of the best armies at just playing Warhammer in terms of every single game I play, I'm just trying to focus on how can I get primary points? How can my opponent not get primary points? How can I get secondary points? How can my opponent not get secondary points? And every game you go into, you're trying to accomplish that by either move blocking or tagging your opponent and then counter punching and threatening some angles so that they can't be too aggressive to score primary and secondary. So it's pretty much on the tin, really, but it's. I think the 18 Bulgaren gets a bit of, obviously. I don't think it's particularly healthy for the meta, but it's not a very straightforward army to play, and you've got to focus a lot on the fundamentals of the game. The earliest I ever used my Bulgarins, I think, was on turn 3 one game, and most of the time,
I watched.
4 and 5.
Yeah, you were just like rolling for 10 and 11-inch charges sitting in safety, being like, if they make it, awesome. If they don't, I don't care. I like that strat. I think that's cool.
So you're trying to, with a unit like that, you're trying to reduce your opponent's assets down as far as possible to where they can't reach a breakpoint of beating Bulgaren on OC and damage to where you'll just cover the board in 2 turns and kind of lock the game out from there. But yeah, fun army. Obviously, I felt like, I think, a lot of people thought that there was one of the strongest armies going in. But yeah, fun overall.
All right, Inez, tell us about the GSC. It's pretty much you and one other person on this freaking planet, Eric Lathuris, who've put GSC on the map.
GSC actually, hilariously, are now tracking at a 53% win rate over the last 3 weeks.
Literally because of you two guys. That's it.
Sure,
just on your back.
A little bit of inspiration, and a whole bunch of people have swapped over to it and been doing really well. So we can't claim all the credit anymore. But yeah, I was playing an Outlander Claw list, which is the double OC detachment. So just a horde of vehicles and recurring infantry with just, I just call it pocket sand damage. Just everything dies. You just throw pocket sand in its eyes until it falls over, crying, and eventually it goes away. So yeah, I had 5 Goliaths, 5 Ridge Runners, 6 units of Flamer Acolytes, and some bikes and some other random stuff, and then triple Calamorph to make everybody frustrated. And I drove at people and stood on their objectives a bunch. I ended up being the lowest scoring person in the 5-0 bracket. I think I dropped more points per game than some people dropped in the entire Swiss, because I was just sitting there going, I'm just playing to deny you points, and I'll score slightly more than you in every single one of my games. I consistently did that all the way through, but it did result in me having to play the shadow round and then going down with it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very happy with the army. The ability to play like the super tight angles on the boards with the Red Runners using their ability to go back into reserve to come in and pick angles on people again after they had committed dealing with stuff. And then having all the recursion on the infantry just lets you play for such a solid late game. And then the amount of scout pressure gives you just some really solid turn ones.
Yeah. And then couple that with the fact one of the only good priced things in your book is the Calamorph and the Reductor Saboteur being well costed loan ops at, which can be taken en masse. It's just a great way to tie everything together. Brian, tell us about your menagerie, mate, because literally I looked at your list and I'm like, it's Index Orcs.
Yeah, I mean, it's Joe described it best, right? It's just a couple Star Collecting boxes. Most of my stuff's packed, right? No, I think the in general, I felt like the Warhorde detachment is still the strongest orc detachment.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It has some incredibly strong abilities, and it actually got a bit of a buff because of the fact that the Korean got a little bit better. And given that, I kind of went back to what I was playing when I was playing Index in general, which is boys and battle wagons. I think Sean was the first one to kind of really pioneer these 20-man boy units in battle wagons, and I kind of took that on, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit. I did something similar in 9th, and the biggest changes really between kind of what you would imagine for orcs and what you've been really seeing is not very many people playing big mechs and not very many people playing Burnas. So I guess I can speak to those two things real fast. The big mech fundamentally changes on one of the core ways that skilled players play against orcs, which is that they try and put models really close to you so that they get to dictate when you get to play Warhammer. And the big mechs don't allow you to do that. So now you have to try and create either pull back properly, or which gives you a lot of board control as the orc player, or it forces your opponent to try and like gauge exactly what the right way to place it is. And move blocks in practice are actually extremely difficult to achieve and become easier to achieve properly the closer you are to your opponent. So the further you push that back, the more opportunities your opponent have for making a mistake and you being able to do some of these like really abstract kind of charge angles and lines and stuff like that. At least a couple of which I'm sure I did on stream at some point. So I think it's really, really powerful in that space. Plus, it lets you roll advances, and I roll 1s first, and 6s the second time. That's good.
Nice.
Yeah, and then Burner Boys for me was, my list was 1990s, and Burner Boys are 60, Storm Boys are 65. So the Burners could have been Storm Boys, but I found that usually if I'm doing actions with something like a Storm Boy unit, it's going to be on the edge of the board anyway, because a lot of the actions want you to do that, or that's where you're going to be safe. In which case, Strat Reserve is fine. And Storm Boys don't actually do any damage at all. So as a 5-man unit, at least. And given that they're not really doing serious damage, especially outside of the WOG, I wanted to have a unit which could help me clear screens. And so one of the things that Burnas are really good for is, and I had a practice game against Nassim where this came up, where what I did was he put a Chimera in the middle of the board with 10 guys inside with the intention of next turn, because again, I was going second, of taking those guys and stringing them out in front of all my stuff to try and make it so it's hard for me to be able to activate a lot of my army. But by me putting the Burnas out onto, not only was I able to deny the objective he was standing on because of the 5OC to his 2, but I'm also threatening an Overwatch. So if he disembarks those 10 guys, I can kill a ton of them. And then stop that move block from ever happening. And so it's another way of kind of adding a dynamic to the orc list, which usually doesn't exist.
And they have rerolls to wound on objectives.
They have one of the weirdest wordings ever. So they reroll 1s to wound, and they reroll full reroll to wounds if you're on an objective, which I'm sure is common. A lot of people have seen this for flamer units, but only if you're within 6 on a model-to-model basis. I don't know why they have that rider, but they
why?
Sure, yeah, I don't know why they have that.
Sure.
Sure. All right. Last question going around the room. We'll start with David again. What was your high point? What was your play of the event?
High point? Yeah, so I had the stream game against Ash where she showed like a huge amount of sportsmanship where we both chatted out the end of the game and then worked out how we could settle the game. So props to Ash. She's a new player from Singapore to the UK, so that was
absolute gun as well, by the way.
Yeah, she is a really, really, really good player, and I knew that because we both started playing TTS at almost the exact same time when we both got into the game. So that was fun. Actually, we had a sick game. Some pretty spicy Scion work in that one. So that was cool.
I watched that one. Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah. That was a good one. And then my lowest of low point was rocking up to my round 7 board, probably. And but counterbalanced by the fact that I was playing the Shadow round against Lewis Smith, who is like my neighbor, and we play together, and we also sharing the ride home. So it was like the funnest game of 40k. We were just like, oh fuck it, man! Like
you guys played to pay for the Uber, right? That was the
exactly. The I was like, whoever wins has to buy the Uber. So, yeah, that was super fun. I mean, obviously seeing everyone. Like, I think one thing I forgot to mention is like if you look at, and I'm going to be biased here. But if you, and this is maybe going to be some shots fired, but if you look at the density of incredible players at an event like the LGT versus potentially an event of similar size. I think if you look at like the top 50 or 40 players, it's just like insane amounts of density. So you
Wait,
hit
Dave,
like
what similar sized event are you referring?
yeah, there's one that's a little bit bigger.
Some shade being thrown. Wow.
But like, yeah, if you look at round 5, 6, and 7, like there's some crazy people playing games. Like my day 2 was I played Ash Kiantan, who's won best newcomer at WTC, extremely good player on stream. Then I played Kyle Grundy, who is whatever
Number
ranked one ITC
world.
right now. Oh, then I played Alex Harrison. Okay, and then I played Lewis Smith, who made the top 4. So my day 2 was like it was a bit of an uphill battle, but that makes it so cool as well. So yeah, awesome time.
Especially as you beat all of them. So yeah, of course you would say that.
Yeah.
Almost all.
Nice.
Almost all. Yeah.
Almost. Brian, your high point.
I mean, the high point is easily when my Liam charged my battle wagon, and just to kind of move block me off the objective, and I do 4 damage with most of my attacks, and then roll the wrecking ball, hit, and then I wound, and then he fails to save, and I call the 6, roll it, boom, it explodes, get on the objective, get the 15.
Wow.
That was definitely the highest point for me of the tournament. The low point was probably, shortly after my game with Liam when I was really reflecting on it. And I just realized, every time you look back on a game you lose, there's things you could have done differently. And I think looking at that board state, if I would have played it properly, I had a pretty clear path to having a really good shot at winning that game if I would have just played it that turn 3 very differently. So, that's disappointing. But overall, fantastic event.
Great self-reflection though, by it. Like that's a testament to your level of integrity. That even most people would just be like, "Man, I played off for the win. That's awesome. That's all. That's all I need to take away from this. I'm proud of myself." But you still went through those motions and gave yourself the same self-evaluation for any game. I think that's spectacular of you.
Cheers.
Inez, your turn.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting moments of mine. I had a turn, my turn 1 against the Cursed Cultist in round 6. I drove like my truck forward and like jumped onto an objective, put 20 OC on it. And was like, all right, I'm going to try and deny some primary. And then I looked over and I'm like, is that Cypher in the middle of that a curse brick? And then I grenaded him and shot him to death top of 1, and that felt really good. It's like 2 CP, 4 damage. All right, neophytes will shoot him. I managed to kill him top of 1. That was a great feeling. Low light is probably the same as David, just rocking up, looking at that table for round 7, realizing the way the terrain was set up, I couldn't scout onto the middle objective of my bike's turn 1, so I couldn't sticky 2 objectives turn 1, and then the side objective was completely open against the gun line, and I'm like, well, I'm never holding primary this game, and I'm going first in Linchpin. And just kind of looking at that game and deciding that the only reasonable out I had was to just swing for the fences and go for a nuke on the Tesseract Vault turn 1, which I ran the math on is like a 1% chance to kill afterwards. I'm like, it's maybe not what I should have put my whole tournament on. But it really didn't feel like I had a better out in that moment. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing to really feel like I didn't have a chance after I'd won the roll-off. He rolled a 1 for first turn as Hypercrypt, and I'm like, oh god, and I rolled a 1 and matched it, and then lost the reroll. It's like, oh no,
so brutal.
It's rough.
So heartbreaking, because it really did feel like up until then every game had been in my control. There had definitely been, I'd gotten the good side of some first turns and second turns and the bad side of others, and to have that be what it felt like my tournament came down to. And I'm sure there's other things I could have done in that game, but it, under the situation, it didn't feel like it at the time. So that's always rough to have when you're starting your 4th game of the day, 10th of the weekend at 11 p.m. at night, or like 9 p.m. at night, like when we started. So
yeah.
Well, gentlemen, that brings to a close the LGT coverage and recap episode. Thank you all 3 for coming on and sharing your amazing insights. Like, I think I've learned something from all 3 of you this show, which is absolute. Hopefully, everyone else at home as well, because you guys are all absolute big brain maniacs, and we're treasured to have you on the show. So thank you so much. We're going to go and record part 2, where we're going to answer some patron questions, talk some absolute trash, and it's going to be. I'm just going to throw some questions at Brian, being like, how did you make orcs work and stuff like that, and Inez, like, how good can GSC actually be, and David, when are you going to add 15 more scions? You're bad because you don't. And hopefully many, many more. We're going to have a song coming up in a moment from my brother and my brother's band. That is Days Worth. You can go check him out over on Spotify. So far, it's been really well received by us, and thank you so much, people who've enjoyed it. Hopefully you're looking forward to seeing what comes up on that. But, if it's not your cup of tea, that's why it's at the end. You can just turn off right now, and hopefully we'll catch you over on the other side. Say your good nights, gentlemen.
thanks for having us, Adam.
Yeah.
Brian.
Nice. I was tapped out, sorry.